Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Good.
All right, hello everybody. I'm going to speak fast. My name is Michal Lyons, and I work for South Bank University, but by profession and trade, I'm an architect planner, and I worked in the field for about 12 years before going into academia. So I have a very applied approach to most of the things I do. This book, Building Back Better, I'm going to talk primarily about some of the key challenges to people-centered reconstruction, and then Joe and Cassidy will talk about some strategic responses to particular aspects of challenges, and Theo will talk about a position paper we've developed, which is altogether more practical about dealing with challenges. So here we go. First of all, this is a very important moment in the field of reconstruction because there's been very substantial change. Organizations which specialized in housing have moved into reconstruction. Organizations which specialized in relief have moved into reconstruction. There are differences of opinion as to how you define and approach the solution of problems. And also, on the other hand, happily, there are growing links between disaster risk reduction debates and reconstruction debates. So these are important moments to talk about strategic issues. People-centered reconstruction, what do we mean by this term? We mean essentially a reconstruction process generally focused largely on housing, or at least the capital aspect of which is housing, which allows people a significant say in some in relevant aspects of the process. Doesn't have to be everything, doesn't have to be a specific thing always, doesn't have to be physical construction, but it does have to be enough for them to feel that they have been significantly involved and to make an impact on other aspects of their lives and to shape the process. Overall, as John mentioned, there is ample and mounting evidence that participatory reconstruction has great advantages over donor-driven reconstruction. It generally costs less, can break ground sooner, takes less time overall, produces better buildings on the whole, it develops better places, it facilitates the reestablishment of livelihoods earlier, and it facilitates the establishment or reestablishment of local political structures with a small l and a small p, which show signs that they may be more resilient. And it produces more satisfied customers and less complaints, fewer complaints through official channels at least. The book argues that participatory reconstruction is possible and that there are examples supposed to demonstrate this, even when facing large-scale destruction, even when dealing with large numbers of households, even in environments which are institutionally and politically hostile, and even when you have a restricted budget, but perhaps particularly when you have a restricted budget. These two slides are simply, I particularly want to, the one at the top left is pretty obvious. It's simply to say that if there is room for people to discuss with each other and to build plans together, they are more likely to work together in the future and to establish ways of doing that. What I particularly want to point to in the bottom left-hand corner is a small project, actually, part of the larger project that program, the Practical Action, undertook after the tsunami in Sri Lanka. This is near Matara in southern Sri Lanka, for those of you who know the area. The reason I particularly want to focus on this is that I think it's an excellent example of what participatory construction can achieve on the ground. It's such a humane environment. It really strikes you. It's a place where people live, where people enjoy the outdoors, where they share a public space. And this was possible because the program as a whole, although quite large, actually carried out the reconstruction in lots of small clusters. When you deal with a small cluster, you can negotiate urban infill in a much better way. That means that you have access to existing infrastructure, existing amenities, and so on and so forth. So there are enormous advantages. participatory construction, and it can be done on a large scale, but you mustn't forget that the core element of it is what you're doing on the small scale locally. And I think Joe has something to say about clusters, about large numbers of clusters as an NGO strategy for upscaling. So the book is essentially in 3 parts, but I would like to skip now to those chapters which deal with key challenges to large-scale programs. First of all, what do we mean by large-scale programs? The largest reconstruction challenges we face on the whole are in the order of 100,000 homes in a country. The Million Houses program in Sri Lanka, after the tsunami, reconstructing close to 100,000 homes has taken 4 or 5 years. And that's not bad going for post-disaster reconstruction. But the Million Houses program in Sri Lanka built 800,000 homes in 4 or 5 years. Okay, in 7 or 8 years. But just to say, when we're talking about large scale, we don't need to pat ourselves on the back quite so much. Bigger challenges have been successfully met. Sri Lanka is the Sri Lanka chapter is very interesting because Sri Lanka instituted what it intended to be a very small, owner-driven participatory program. This became a very large program. It in fact accounted not for 20% but for 80% of the reconstruction there. And it was very successful on all the counts I mentioned above. But this chapter identifies all sorts of inequalities within the program and things for NGOs to think about in dealing with different types of terrain, different types of community, different types of different profiles of local technical skill, and so on and so forth. The second set of challenges that we look at in the book is set in Pakistan, but really could be anywhere. It's about the difference between the potential for reconstruction in rural and urban areas. And the argument there is that the higher, the greater political sensitivity, the high land costs, the difficulties, the practical difficulties of locating transitional shelter close enough to reconstruction sites, the difficulty in identifying infill sites, which drives one to have to look for larger sites outside the town. The fact that town planning legislation is much more cumbersome, involved, and more rigorously applied in urban areas mean that it's much more difficult to get reconstruction off the ground in urban areas, and particularly more difficult for participatory processes. In Indonesia, I'm not really going to look at this chapter, which is about the challenges to agency policy and its relationship with government, because Joe is going to talk about it very soon. And I will move to another very, very interesting set of discussions in Chapter 7, which is about, it's exemplified in India. India had a very, very successful participatory construction program in Bhuj after the 2001 earthquake. But a couple of years ago, when it came to institutionalize a national program for reconstruction, it completely ignored the benefits of participatory processes. And this discussion asks, why was that easier to do? And it doesn't set the answer in any of the practical difficulties of reconstruction. It sets them in the prejudice against adapted traditional architectural designs, which are a more likely model to use in reconstruction, and in the structure of social housing, which has been very top-down traditionally in India, kind of dictated by the socialist agenda. So it's very important to stand back from the problems of reconstruction and think about its cultural setting, its political setting, and to see what's driving the resistance you meet. Finally, I just want to quickly look at Colombia, because that's a very thought-provoking example. And the challenge is not so much to participatory reconstruction itself, but to the undertaking reconstruction, participatory reconstruction, necessarily by international agencies. Because in Colombia, after the 1991 earthquake, it was undertaken by the Coffee Growers Association. Very successfully, very flexibly. If you wanted to build back your coffee drying facilities, that was fine. They'd lend you the money and give you the engineering drawings. And if you wanted to rebuild the roof of your house, and deal with your family first, that was also fine. So they were capable of much more flexibility than most agencies manage, and that is really something to think about. We're going to skip that, go straight to this. And I would like to say very quickly here that the book is available today for £10 only, including postage and packing. Thank you very much. Any questions, welcome.